Mike doesn't scare me too much. I'm going to be reading from John chapter 4, and this is probably a familiar story to you, and I'm going to read the first 26 verses. Now, when Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that Jesus was making and baptizing more disciples than John, although Jesus himself did not baptize, but only his disciples, he left Judea and departed again for Galilee. And he had to pass through Samaria, so he came to a town of Samaria called Sychar, near the field that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, so Jesus, wearied as he was from his journey, was sitting beside the well. It was about the 6th hour. A woman from Samaria came to draw water. Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink," for his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a woman of Samaria? For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans." Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." The woman said to her, "Sir, you have nothing to draw water with, and the well is deep. Where do you get that living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob? He gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did his sons and his livestock." Jesus said to her, "Everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks of the water that I will give him will never be thirsty again. The water that I will give him will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life." The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so that I will not be thirsty or have to come here to draw water." Jesus said to her, "Go, call your husband and come here." The woman answered him, "I have no husband." Jesus said to her, "You are right in saying, 'I have no husband,' for you have had 5 husbands, and the one you have now is not your husband. What you have said is true." The woman said to him, "Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you say that in Jerusalem is the place where people ought to worship." Jesus said to her, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. But the hour is coming and is now here when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For the Father is seeking such people to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth." The woman said to him, "I know that Messiah is coming, he who is called Christ. When he comes, he will tell us all things." Jesus said to her, "I who speak to you am he." Thank you very much. It is quite a privilege to be able to be here today and to speak for you. As Pastor Mike said, I told him not to tell too much about me because I wanted to do some of that as part of my introduction to the message today. And but just a little bit about myself before I get there. I'm a teacher, and I just have loved teaching God's Word, and I've been doing it since I've been 18 years, or since I was 18 years old. So now is 41 years. And you can tell how old I am now. So for 41 years, I've been teaching God's Word, and that really has been my passion. And how I got to here. One of the things that my wife and I and Caitlin, my second to the youngest daughter, do is that we teach Bible quizzing in the church. And so in 2018, we were studying the book of John in Bible quizzing. And it just so happened that Dr. Walker was teaching a class on the Gospel of John. And the MTI program, they offered to any quiz coaches that wanted to come, that they could come for free and be a part of that class and to do it for audit. And so I signed up to do it for audit, and I didn't go for free. I thought, wow, the MTI classes are cheap, really. Just even to get credit for it, you only pay $150. I mean, that's cheap for any schooling. And so I looked at that as a unique opportunity. And to be honest with you, I have always looked up to Dr. Walker and just really wanted to sit under his teaching once again. And so jumped at that opportunity, and I happened to ask Mike if he would mind, even though I was doing it for audit, if I would be able to go ahead and write the papers and to do the work, if he would grade them and just give me some feedback, and he so graciously did that. Well, so here we are. It wasn't long after that class was over, I decided that was a lot of fun. And I really enjoyed doing that. I enrolled in the next class and got to talking and really was spurred on to do this for credit. And so I called Mike again, said, Mike, can I ask a favor? Do you mind giving me a grade? I'll pay the extra $50, for the grade or whatever. And he said, yes, that's no problem whatsoever. And so here I am standing before you now, just about completed with my MTI classes. And so a little bit of introduction before the introduction. The title of the message today is A Case of Mistaken Identity. I just ask you, who are you? So if somebody came up to you and you were in a situation, you needed to introduce yourself, what would you tell them? Obviously you'd tell them your name and maybe where you're from. It depends on the setting. You might tell them what church you go to or, what company you work for, those kinds of things. As I mentioned before, I like to teach, and I've been asked to teach differing groups over the years. And so if it's a group of people that normally doesn't come together, one of my favorite activities is some sort of icebreaker that people get to introduce themselves. And I've been fond of one where I split people up into twos. And then, so I give everybody 5 minutes to learn something about the other person, and then at the end of that 5 minutes, they will have to introduce who those people are. I found out that that's also a good exercise for people that think they know each other as well, because I don't think we really know the people that we know, if that makes sense. And that really is a problem in our day and age, isn't it? We live in a social media kind of world. And now I don't know how many of you are active on social media, but you know what I'm talking about. But we live in a world where we take bits and pieces and we put it out there for people to think that they know us, right? And we get to choose what those bits and pieces are. But they don't really know us, right? And the funny thing is we call those people that think they know us, call them friends. But friends really, they're with you through thick and thin. And if we don't share with them the thin, what good are they? That kind of thing. So who are you? Who are you really? As was introduced, my name is John Fetterhoff, and I'm 59, if you couldn't do the math. We currently belong to the Newburgh First Church of God in Newburgh. We live in Newville, Pennsylvania. I don't know, maybe 60 miles northwest of here, and I've held various positions within the church and have been part of church leadership for almost as long as I can remember, and just really enjoy being that. I am from Dauphin County. I grew up in Stony Creek Valley. I don't know if any of you know where that is, but there was a time when everybody had a bumper sticker on that said "Save Stony Valley." uh, and they wanted to do some development and kinds of things back there, and they never did it. So I guess they saved it. I don't know. But I lived in Stony Valley, and my family is just from over the mountain, maybe over 2 mountains over there in the Halifax area, Enterline area. I don't know if any of you know where that is. Just kind of backwoods, where farm people. And so my grandfather had a farm in Clarks Valley, and I spent most of my days, at least during the summer and times after school on the weeknights, working on that farm. It was hard work, but I find that in my old age, I really look back on those days of working there on the farm with my grandfather. Pap is who I called him, and my brother and my cousins as we helped there on that farm. Since I was about 10, I've belonged to the Churches of God. I belonged to the Stone Glen Church of God, and when we were around 16 or so, I bumped into some girl at church camp, and she was a Harrisburg girl, a city girl, and the thing is, I fell in love with her, and so not long after that, I realized that if I wanted to spend time with her, I was going to go to her church, and so my wife Beth and I have been married now for this will be our 40th year in November, and as I said, we met at church camp, and so. She belonged to the United Church of God. At that time, it was the Maclay Street and North Street Church of God. They came together and united, so they called it the United Church of God. And so that is where we went. That is where when I was 18, when I first began teaching Sunday school, a Sunday school teacher came alongside me and I guess recognized a gift or an ability in me, and wanted to put that to use. And so she allowed me and mentored me in teaching, and I haven't quit since. Beth and I, we have 5 children. I have 4 daughters and 1 son. 2 of my daughters are here today, Caitlin and Jerica. Jerica is my youngest. She will be turning 16 and wanting to drive in June, and she is a sophomore in high school at Big Spring High School, and is a straight A student. I'm so proud of her, and so she's looking forward to heading off to college to learn to be a school teacher, and Caitlin is a graduate of Liberty University. And she is a learning support, is that what you call it? Learning support teacher? I don't know. She at the Mechanicsburg High School, and but there's a learning support program there for all the area schools, and kids come from all over the place, and so she graduated with a psychology degree, and so she's using that to there. Beth and I have 2 grandchildren. They have been such a joy to us, and so my son is the only one that has kids, and he has blessed us now with 2 granddaughters, Mia and Zoe, and we just adore them, and they are our new fascination, if you will. But most of us, right? Most of us would have a similar story. You know, if you get into talking about yourself, you would talk about those kinds of things. You talk about your children, you talk about your interests, what kind of things you like to do. I didn't tell you about my hobbies. I like to be outside. Bicycling is one of my, that's what I do for exercise, and I really enjoy doing that. Sometimes I have to relegate myself to going to the gym because it's too cold, And I just don't enjoy that like I do going for a bike ride. And so when it gets warmer and gets nice out, that's where you'll find me. I come home from work, I hop on my bicycle, and I bike. I like spending time in the garden, working out in the yard. I know I'm weird. I actually enjoy mowing grass. I just enjoy being outside and outdoors. I like to fish, although I don't take time to do that anymore. One of the things that my family likes to do, they like to go to the beach. I don't care so much for the beach, except for I like to fish. And so my son and I, we spend time surf fishing while we're down there, and so we get to spend time together, and everybody gets to enjoy everything all together. It is nice to be away with the family and just to have everybody all together. But if it was in the beach or it was in the mountains, I just enjoy being with them and being able to fish too. So, so anyway, that's the story, right? That's the story we let everybody know. But there is so much more to our lives. Depends on how old you are. You have a whole lifetime worth of experiences and circumstances that mold you and make you into the person that you are. And those things you don't get to share that with somebody unless that somebody has grown up with you or you've lived with that person for a number of years. I don't know that there's much that my wife doesn't know about me. Maybe she can't read my thoughts, but even then I sometimes wonder. She knows what I'm thinking more often than I know what I'm thinking. You know how that goes, right? So today I want to look at what makes up our identity from God's viewpoint. And our lesson, as I mentioned earlier, is probably a familiar story to you. But I want to focus on, and it comes from, the whole story is John 4, chapter 1, or verses 1 through 45. But I just want to focus on the portion that I read, the first 26 verses there. And I will touch on some of the following verses. I'm not sure, at least in my experience, when I've heard this story taught or I've heard it preached, it doesn't come. I don't come away with the same message as I'm giving you today. But when I read this, when I see this, this is the message that God brings out to me, and so I'm bringing it to you. And it has to do with identity. And now, to understand this passage and understand any other passage, you need to be able to see the context of that particular passage. Now, the context of this particular passage, it comes from John. I think that the disciple John is the one that wrote this book. I know that some scholars debate that and whatever, but I'm perfectly happy with allowing John to have written that, and I can even, although it may be weak, I don't know, but I think I can defend the fact that John the disciple is the one that wrote that book, but he told this story for a reason, right? And so you have to wonder, what was John thinking, right? And John's gospel, well, it's not like any other gospel. Pastor Mike taught, from a book called The Strange Gospel. Dr. Resegi wrote the book that Pastor Mike taught from, or I guess you taught from that book or used it as a reference, but he called it the strange gospel. It doesn't match Matthew, Mark, and Luke, right? Those three kind of go together, and John's, although it's called a gospel, it doesn't really match. It doesn't have the same stories. It still talks about Jesus. So apparently John had a different modus operandi, right? He had a different reason in writing that. So there are a couple things in John's gospel in order to be able to figure this out. I think that that this story, the woman at the well, needs to be understood in light of the previous story, the story of Nicodemus meeting Jesus in the beginning of chapter 3. So chapter 3 and 4 kind of need to go together. Now, there is a reason behind why I think that's the case, and in order for that to understand that, you need to go back to the beginning of the book of John, in John chapter 1. And I want to read a couple verses there. It says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God, and all things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was," and this is the part that kind of gets interesting for me as I look at these verses. "In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to bear witness about the light, that all might believe in him. He was not the light, but came to bear witness to the light." And then John goes back again, talking about light and dark again. "The true light, which gives light to everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to his own, and his own people did not receive him, but to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God." So if you look at verses 4 and 5 there, we'll talk about the others, but look at verses 4 and 5. John is talking about this idea of light and dark, and the light being life. And then you get into verse 7, and there's kind of like this, introduction of John the Baptist in there. And then he gets back into talking about light again in verses 11 through 13. I find it interesting, but I think we're supposed to see this connection, that it's not supposed to be a surprise. But if you look at chapter 3, John chapter 3, when does Nicodemus come to see Jesus? It says it was at night. So here we have the first indication of the dark. It says in verse 2, "This man came to Jesus by night and said to him," right? And then we have the woman, the Samaritan woman in chapter 4. When did that encounter take place? It says it was the 6th hour. Well, you need to understand how the Jews understood time, but that is actually noontime to the Jews, the brightest time of the day. The sun is at its peak there, and so you get this contrast. John does this all throughout his gospel. There's this dark and there's light and dark back and forth, and you're supposed to understand something about this, right? Something didn't happen that should have happened during the dark, or something that we don't want to happen, maybe evil. We find out in John chapter 13 when Judas goes out from the upper room when Jesus was having the final supper with them. And it said it was dark. It was night when Judas went out, right? And so John uses this time of day thing to give you an indication of what's going on there. Now, I made a point about this, that John interjected John the Baptist there in our verses there in chapter 1, verse 7. And if you look in chapter 3, between the two stories, Nicodemus and the woman at the well, you get John the Baptist again. And John the Baptist makes this statement about his witness to who Jesus was. And I want to point out a verse there that I think helps us understand what these two stories are about. In verse 33, John 3:33, John makes this statement. It says, whoever receives his testimony, God's testimony, Jesus' testimony, sets his seal to this, that God is true. Now, those are identity words. Those words talk about who we represent, who is our identity, right? And so I think that John is saying these two stories are about identity. Nicodemus didn't quite get it. Now we know that Nicodemus eventually does get it. You know, we find out in John chapter 7 that he's standing up for Jesus and the disciples. We find out at the end of the book in John that he is one of the two men, he and Joseph of Arimathea, that come and take Jesus' body down off the cross. And Nicodemus bought the spices and brought them to, so Nicodemus, he didn't get it here in chapter 3. At some point, there was a conversion, and John tells us that Nicodemus was a disciple secretly. I'm not sure that's the best kind of disciple in God's mind, and then in contrast to that, we have this woman at the well. So let's look at the scriptures there. Oh, and there's one more part of this context. I told you in the beginning of John, there in the beginning of John 1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Those verses, when you get to thinking about what they're talking about, they're reminiscent of the very first book of the Bible, Genesis, right? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, kind of a deal. And so that takes us back there, and then part of that story is this, in verses 26 and 27, is when God created man, and he set man to be in his image. It says, in his image he created them, and let us make man in our image after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created them. Now, my understanding of this last portion, this last couple scriptures there that provide context, is that our identities are to be found in God and God alone, right? Sure, God allows things in our lives, those situations, those experiences, and in our lives, but we can't allow them to define who we are. We use them. God desires for us to use them as filters, as experiences and opportunities to show our true identity to the people who are around us, right? But we can't be defined by those things. Now, when we look at the story here in John chapter 4, I think what we find is a woman who is bound by her own self-made identity. The world, what the world had made her out to be. So let's take a moment and look at those scriptures in a little bit more detail. I won't go exactly verse by verse, but I'm going to kind of go over this quickly, but to get you the idea of what is going on here. First off, we find out that Jesus was on his way to Galilee. He was in Jerusalem. He was on his way to Galilee, and so he had to go north. Now, to go north, to get to Galilee, you had to travel, a straight line anyway, to travel through Samaria. The Jews did not like the Samaritans, and so typical travel, if they could and could spare the time, they would circumvent Samaria. They would cross the Jordan River, head up along the shore of the Jordan River, cross back over the Jordan River, and then back into Galilee. So much was their hatred of the Samaritans. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But Jesus had to go through Samaria. So we read that and say, well, I guess he really didn't have to go through there, right? But yet John included here that he had to go through Samaria. I'll talk about that in a moment as well. So Jesus had to go through Samaria, and on entering into Samaria, he came upon the crossroad there, and there at the crossroad was this well, and Jesus sat down, and it was noontime, is what we find out, and then the woman comes. She was a woman from that region, a Samaritan woman, and she came to the well to draw water. Now, this is where the story really gets interesting. You know, when you kind of taking it apart and trying to figure out what's going on. Why was the woman there at the well at noon? That is not the time when women go to the well to draw water. First off, the sun's at its peak. It's the heat of the day. That's not the time to be drawing water. Drawing water was hard work, especially when you're carrying back full jars to your home. And you don't do that alone. So typically the women come first thing in the morning, or maybe in the evening, in the coolness of the day, and there's a group of women there, and they help each other, filling up their jars and then getting them situated on their shoulders or their heads, or sometimes they would have a pole and carry, but a jar of water is heavy. Over 50 pounds, or probably 50 pounds, and so these women, had to carry these things and manipulate them. So this wasn't a job for just one solitary woman. So you have to wonder, what was she doing there at the well at noon? Now, the reason is not spelled out specifically, but I believe that there are clues in the scripture that give us some indication of what is going on. So she goes there at noon to gather the water, and then a little bit later we find out that she has been together with multiple husbands, and so we kind of put together this idea that she may be a woman of loose morals. I don't know what the circumstances were. In Jewish society, you were allowed, at least, now this is the Jews, not necessarily Samaritans, the priests or the rabbis, or, they would typically allow a man to divorce a wife and remarry again up to maybe 3 times. But this woman, she had 5 husbands, and she was living with one that was not her husband at the time. It kind of makes you wonder, just what was going on. So you can imagine the kind of talk and the gossip and things that would go around during those, when she was around, or maybe even behind her back when she was there. We'll talk a little more about that a little bit later as well. Jesus says to her, "Give me a drink." And he says that to her there, and that's in verse 7. Give me a drink. Now, I think that this is kind of interesting, and I see in this a key to understanding the whole passage here of Scripture. Jesus gets to the point immediately, on meeting this woman. This is very similar to Jesus' encounter with Nicodemus. Nicodemus introduces himself when he gets there in chapter 3, and gives some accolades to Jesus about being a rabbi, and we know that you're from God, and all of that. And then immediately Jesus says something, that you need to be born again, and knocks Nicodemus, on the back of his seat. What's going on here? Jesus takes Nicodemus immediately out of his comfort zone and confronts him with the issue. The same thing goes on here again with the woman at the well. And so Jesus says to her, "Give me a drink." Now, obviously, it was noontime, and the scripture tells us that Jesus was tired. And so he probably was thirsty. But did Jesus really want a drink of water from this woman? You know, the interesting thing is that as you read through this scripture, nowhere do you find that Jesus got a drink of water, right? And if Jesus was thirsty, why didn't he have a bucket to get some water out of the well? If you travel in that country, travelers, you carried a piece of leather that was folded up and it was sewn together, and you carried it. In their pack or whatever. I don't think they had pockets like I do. But you had this thing, and so that whenever you traveled, there were wells interspersed throughout the countryside, along the roads, and obviously you need to have water to stay hydrated, to be able to continue on your journey. And so you had one of these little buckets that you would, lower down some string and wheel back up and so that you could get water. And if you were traveling in a group of people, maybe you would have even a larger one because you would fill up all the canteens or all the skins, with the water and those kinds of things. Why didn't Jesus have one? If he was thirsty, he sent his disciples on into the town to go get food. Why didn't he have them leave the bucket of water? Right? So kind of, these kind of things keep me up at night. I think about, why, what's going on here? And so I don't think the story is about Jesus wanting a drink of water. He might have wanted a drink of water, and John doesn't record that Jesus actually got a drink of water. So obviously John is telling us something else about this story. Could there be another reason that Jesus asked the woman to drink? Now, Jesus had to go through Samaria, right? We already talked about that. He sent his disciples off to get food so that he would end up there by himself waiting for this woman to come at noon. Now, who knew that a woman would be coming to the well at noon, right? Do you think all that was a coincidence? I don't think there's any coincidence, right? God incidences or a divine appointment is how I like to see this, Jesus knew that this woman would be coming to the well, and he had an appointment with her, even though she didn't know it. But he had an appointment with her. He needed to speak with her, right? And so he asked her for this drink of water. I think that asking for this drink of water was a point to the flaw in her, the woman's understanding of who she was, and also provided a jumping off point for her to understand who she could be, right? And so Jesus asked this woman for a drink of water, and immediately the woman starts talking about the problem with her identity. The first thing is that Jesus was a Jew and she was a Samaritan. Well, Jews and Samaritans don't have anything to do with one another. They don't talk with one another. And you certainly don't drink or eat anything that would have been touched by one another. And so there's a problem here. The problem is that the woman is understanding, I'm a Samaritan and you're a Jew. You have no reason to be talking to me, and I don't have any reason to be talking to you. So just let me go and let me get my drink. The second issue is that she's a woman. Now, there's no indication here that the woman knew who Jesus was. That comes later. But the interesting thing is that Jesus fully understood who he was, right? And so it was even unlawful for a rabbi, for a teacher, to talk to a woman in public. There are some indications that rabbis would rather have to deal with pigs than talk with a woman in public. I can't imagine, but they wouldn't even talk to their wives or their daughters in public, right? And so Jesus understood who he was, but that didn't stop Jesus from this conversation. So she points out that she's a Samaritan, he's a Jew, I'm a woman, you're a man. This isn't going to work, kind of a thing. Jesus provides an answer to her in verse 10 to these couple things. He says, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, give me a drink, you would have asked him and he would have given you living water. So at this point, she's thinking this guy is some kind of kook, right? And I really need to get rid of him. He has nothing to draw water with, and where do you get this water is her reply. And secondly, who do you think you are? Jacob gave us this well. He dug it, and he's been drinking from it, and it's our well, not your well. So go away, right? And you don't have a bucket to get the water out anyway, and you can't drink the water I'm going to give you because I'm a Samaritan, I'm a woman, and all that. So she's thinking she's going to get rid of Jesus, right? Guess again. And then we got verses 13 and 14. Jesus continues with his appeal. He's not caught off guard or caught by surprise, but she has no choice but to come to the well. He says to her something that is that sparks her interest. Jesus says to her that if you take this water that I give you, you will be not thirsty anymore. That caught her attention, right? I don't want to come to the well anyway. I don't like coming here by myself. I had to come here at noon. If I don't have to come back ever again, that's a great thing. Maybe I'll find out some more information. Find the website that I can look this up and, get, where I can get that. Maybe I can get it off Amazon, that kind of thing. So she questions Jesus, where can I get living water like that? And you can almost hear in her eyes, or hear in her voice and in her eyes, just the grief that she's been dealing with, all the shame and the points of derision from the other people, and she says, and she almost says to the guy, boy, if you could just give me that water, that'd be awesome. That'd be great. I don't have to come back here again. She doesn't get the point, right? She's still thinking about water. Gee, maybe I can, install a flushable toilet, all that kind of thing. I don't need to come back to the well and deal with this mocking and jeering and being cursed and the object of gossip and the brunt of jokes and stories. Can any of you relate to that? Have you been hurt like that in your lives? And you just rather not have to deal with those kinds of things? So she says, Sir, give me this water so that I'll not be thirsty or have to come here to draw water. And then Jesus says something kind of odd. Go call your husband. Right? And so he gets to the root of all this problem, this identity issue, what is keeping her from being who she is. This is the root cause of everything. Just kind of like Jesus. He gets to the core of everything that's going on. And so he says, call your husband. And the woman's thinking, wait, I didn't tell you that. How could you possibly know that about me? And yet she's thinking, maybe there's still a way I can get out of this. I'm here at this time of day, so I don't have to be reminded of these things and of who I am and what everyone thinks of me. And so in 17 and 18, she says, I have no husband. And Jesus confirms their answer. He says, you're right, you don't. In fact, you've had 5 husbands, and the one that you're living with is not your husband. And the woman's thinking, wow, this is weird. How does he know all this stuff? And there's no place left to hide. Nothing left to hide anymore. Now remember all those things that we would use to introduce ourselves. Jesus got all those things out that you would never introduce yourself with. all the flaws, all the bad things that have happened to our lives, and all of that came out in this conversation and allowed her to be free to see the man who was in front of her. She brings up one more issue, and this is really an issue, at least for the Samaritans, and it had to do with worship. Now, I don't think maybe it was so much about worship, but here was a man who was telling her that she needed to get her life right, and and her problem was she didn't even know where to find God, right? Her leaders or her elders told her that they have to worship on Mount Gerizim, right? She says on this mountain. The Jews says, well, no, you can't worship over there. You can only worship in Jerusalem, and that's where God is found. That's where the Holy of Holies is. That's where the man goes once a year, and sprinkles the blood and confesses the sins and all that. And so here I am, a Samaritan woman, and we don't even have access to God. That really was the point of her question here. And Jesus says, woman, the time is coming when the location no longer matters. With the coming of the Holy Spirit, you'll be able to worship God wherever you are, right? And then she replies, I know that Messiah is coming, and he, at that time, will make everything clear. And so she's like, please, just let me go. I understand I'm stuck in this hole that I've dug myself in. I can't get out, and I'm doomed to this position until the Messiah comes, and he'll make everything clear. Can you hear the compassion in Jesus' voice as he says the next words? Right? And he blows up everything. It just, everything kind of goes away. And he says, I who am speaking to you am he. These are the very words that were spoken to Moses, 1,500 years before on Mount Sinai, as Moses approached the burning bush, that those the very words or the very personal name of God, Yahweh, as it was revealed to Moses, Jesus is saying to this woman, I am he. Ego eimi is the Greek translation of those words, and in John uses those words 29 times as Jesus confesses those words throughout the book. John wants you to know that you can know the one and only God, right? The God, the Word that was flesh, that came before, that was with God. You can know him, and you can know him personally. And here you are, a Samaritan woman, standing here in front of him. Most interesting, right? So what does she do? The very reason why she came to the well was to bring her jar there, her empty jar, to get water. We're told that she left her water jar and left and went back to the town that she was from. She left everything, right? All the world's cares and the things that were going on, all of that went away in the revelation of knowing that you're in the presence of the one and only God. It kind of reminds me of Isaiah in chapter 6. He finds himself before the throne room of God, and God speaks, and he realizes that I'm a man of unclean lips, and I don't deserve to be here. It's that kind of revelation. All the world's cares and things kind of go away. And so it was with this woman. She took off left her water jar. I don't know. Maybe Jesus grabbed some water then. I don't know. We're not told. But she left and went and into the town. The very people who ostracized her, who put her off into the margins of that society. She went back to them. She talked to them and said, "Come and see a man who has told me everything that I've ever done." And we find out that she turned that world upside down. People came to Jesus, and Jesus ended up staying there for 2 more days as he witnessed and told stories, and many of them were converted and believed because of this woman of questionable character. It's amazing, right? What God can do when you come into the presence of God. So, who are you really? Is your identity found in God? Do you see your story providing opportunities to expose the identities of people around you? Really, that is our job. Jesus says in Matthew chapter 5, verses 14 and 15, he says that you are the light of the world. The light exposes the darkness, right? And so as we go out, we know our true identity, and Jesus shines through us. We are to be that light, right? Not the dark. Light and dark, like John talks about here. We are to go out, and it's interesting that in Genesis 1:26 and 27, that where God created them, he says that all men are created in God's image. It's not just the ones who believe. All men. We just forget who we are, right? So we need to get all this stuff out of the way so people can understand who they truly are. Paul shares the same thoughts in Romans 1:23. He says that we've lost our true identity. We've exchanged it for a lie. And in his case, he unfolds in the letter as he makes the case that though we are lost in the circumstances of life, we can find our true identity in Jesus Christ, and then allowing his light to shine on us and in us. He calls us by the mercies of God to present our bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is our spiritual worship. I find that we too, as the church, though our intentions may be good as we deal with life and the issues of the people we serve, we too can lose our identity. In Revelation chapter 3, verses 15 and 16, Jesus is speaking to the church at Laodicea. And that church has allowed the world and its values to creep in and obscure who they were meant to be. They were lukewarm, and Jesus says, "I hate you because you're lukewarm. I'm going to vomit you out of my mouth. I would rather that you'd either be cold or hot, that you had a purpose, that you found your true identity," right? We need to be on guard so that we do not lose sight of our calling and in whom we find our true identity. It's my hope and prayer that the Windsor Church of God will continue to be the beacon of light and hope in this world. And I find it an incredible honor to work alongside each of you in that effort.